This is model number 19, and for the AZ400, implementing security into your DevOps project, how we can go ahead and implement our security into our DevOps. We are going to talk about, again, another kind of security, or earlier we have seen a compliance, you can say the compliance requirement of your application. This is also related to compliance and the security for your project. In this project, we are going to understand about how you can implement a security into your pipeline, how we can use something called Azure Security. There is a module, there is a term which is called Azure Security, which is a part of your Azure. So also you can use Azure to implement your security into the different places into your application. So we'll talk about that as well. Uh, in this module, let's start with the securing your pipeline. So how we can secure your pipeline? Okay, this is one of the RUD framework you talk about. Okay, so this is the one of the RUD framework which always talks about DevSecOps. Okay, so this is open source. You can say designed for the following practices into the your DevOps. Okay, so how you can go ahead and implement a different kind of security. If you look at the in the Google, there is a something called RUT framework which is available into Git, which talks about the different type of security, how you can go ahead and do the security into your application. Okay, how you can go ahead and implement a security into your pipeline. Okay, we can go ahead and implement from the build, from the release to the different environment. So this is the what they are going to give. Okay, 1 minute, let me find out if I have the URL. Yeah, so just look for, go to your Google and search for a Rust framework. Okay, mm, and Git. Okay, so this is the GitHub URL which you have. And if you look into this, okay, it is talking about the different kind of security. Okay, so it's complete documentation onto the security which you have, and it is talking about the how you can do a static code analysis. Okay, what are the tools which you can look for? So we have a tool with Windows 2017 for the code analysis. We have a 2019 code analysis. We have a code analyzer. We have a Sonar Lit. We have a PowerShell analyzer. We have a check marks. We have a Visual Studio. We have a Vera code, which is security analysis tool. We have a Fortify. We have a synopsis. So there are multiple tools which is available. If you look at the check marks or Vera code, what that does, how to implement, you have a complete implementation for that particular application. Okay, so it's taking me to your Vera code, how to implement those security. And if you go ahead and look at something called infrastructure, how we can go ahead and implement into infrastructure. If you're going to do a static code analysis, how we can go ahead and implement a static code analysis tool. So you can find out a list of tool from this URL, actually, you can say. Okay, and what are the tools which is available? OWASP tool you have a Sonar Cloud, you have a Micro Focus, you have a GitHub security tool, you have Synopsys, you have Aqua. There is something called dynamic security tool. Okay, so why this is important? Static security and dynamic security. Static security means when the code is sitting into your repo. Okay, that time if you are running any kind of security tool to scan your code from your repository, that is called a static code analysis tool. When the application is running or it's deployed onto server, if you're running any tool to analyze that kind of software which is going to check your DLLs and it is going to analyze, that is called something called dynamic security analysis tool. Okay, so that's you can say this difference which we have, a static analysis and different analysis. You have infrastructure compliance testing, that is inspect, and that is a part of, you can say, the your infrastructure tool which is available. Okay, so you have a sensitive data in the gate, so that you have a lab management you can use. Okay, so Azure DevOps labs are there. Penetration testing, you have artifacts scanning tool, you have. These are the list of tool which you are going to find, okay, and you will be able to help you implement a security into your project using this rugged framework. Okay, coming back to the slides here. So this is what it is talking about. So this is rug framework. It help you, okay, in terms of what all the tools which is available into the market in terms of implementing a security and the compliance requirement for your application. Rug framework basically talks about the security implementation. That's why we called at as a DevSecOps tool. Okay, how we can parameterize, how we can handle those kind of tools. Okay, Rust framework talks about something called a continuous process for your application, scanning the package, scanning the source control, running the penetration testing, doing the vulnerability scan on the nightly basis onto the before deployment. Those there are multiple things you'll be able to do. Okay, so if you look at the something called version management. Okay, so you are doing starting the work from the version management. You are going to put those code into versioning. Then you are going to do a build. Okay, then you do something called, once when you are doing a build, you perform a source code scanning, so which we have did using a Sonar Cloud. So you will be able to do source code scanning. Then once the source code scanning is done, you are going to push the changes to the release phases. Okay, once that is deployed to the release, now we are going to run a something called dynamic status code analysis tool or dynamic scanning tool, which can do a penetration testing, which can look into the dynamic code which is and running already, that can go and scan those. Okay, the penetration testing you can do it for 1 minute or 2 minutes, whatever you want to implement. So do you have a OWASP open source, open web source security tool that you can go ahead and run, check for some time, and then you go for the deployment. So once that is done, you look for the monitoring task. Okay, so you have to consider a monitoring is one of the important topic. We'll talk about that. Okay, so what are the places which you have to go and look for the monitoring? So we'll go for the monitoring. Okay, we'll do the monitoring, and then our DevOps team which works here, which is doing a OSS management, open source security management. Okay, basically what happens if you are going to use any external package, any external feed which you are going to get it. Okay, so this is your external package which is coming as an open source security for you. You must get approval from your compliance team or your security team, who is authorized to approve your open source framework to use into your organization. You should get approval. Once you get approval, you can package that. Either you have to modify a code or you can use a code as it is. Make sure you package that as part of your source control, and you can store those into the source control. So the package management must be approved as a process into your organization when you're going to use, and then only you will be allowed to use into your application. Okay, otherwise that could cause a vulnerability, and which can happen with a huge fine to your project or your organization. To verify your vulnerability, you must use a source code scanner. That's what we are going to talk about. So the package management and the source code scanning is important. And when you get a code, you must put those as a package manager, or you can go ahead and host those into the version control. So you are going to maintain open source security or open source code into the different application. So if you are allowed, if it's in code base directly, you can go ahead and package those, and you can keep that as a package management. Now, if you're going to talk about something called software composite analysis, okay, software composition analysis, it is called SCA. We are going to understand about here package management. Okay, so package management means a unique code which we have developed. So remember when we created artifact, a package, we have created a NuGet package and we have deployed that into the artifact. So make sure you identify a uniqueness of your code. Okay, because your open source, or because your static code analysis is going to find you that what are the duplicate to code you are going to use. Okay, so make sure you find out a uniqueness of your code and put those binary as a artifact. Okay, you can go ahead and use NuGet, npm, maven, those kind of packages which you can go ahead and create and deploy into the Azure artifact. Okay, so that is what you are going to do. Okay, so if you have to identify that kind of packages. If you're using open source security component, also try to reuse those kind of issues, those kind of application, and try to put those as an artifact so that anyone can refer it, okay, anyone can use it. And make sure you regularly go ahead and update those open source code, okay. So make sure, because the open source code will be developed by third party, and what they do, if they found some issue into the code, they also update those versions, or they update those vulnerability into their site. So you have to always go and scan that open source security as well, or the tool, to find out if there is any new version which is available, or they have fixed some issue. Because whenever you get a patches of any of the product, either it's Microsoft product, or for your .NET framework, or for the Java framework, or any other framework, you get a patches is basically nothing. It's going to fix some kind of security vulnerability, and make sure you use a latest package in order to avoid those kind of vulnerability into your application, okay. So you are going to do a scanning of your tool into your application, and which you are going to design it, okay. Okay, so you are going to use something called WhiteSource Bolt, okay. So this is the tool called WhiteSource, and you can go ahead and integrate this tool with your Azure DevOps pipeline, okay. So this is the one of the example of you can say tool which is available to scan your code vulnerability, or you can say open source security vulnerability tool. You can go ahead and download from the Azure marketplace, okay, and you can go ahead and integrate with your with your DevOps pipeline, okay. This is following you can say the rugged framework, okay. So this is a rugged DevOps framework which is followed by the white source bolt, okay. uh, we are going to scan here the open source security, quality, and the licenses, okay. So it is going to check the quality of the source, open source. It is going to check the security in that application, in the DLL or the code which you are going to use. It is going to find out that what kind of licenses you are using into your code, and it is going to continuously detect, and it is going to tell you that how to fix those vulnerability as well, so that you can directly go ahead and fix those vulnerability immediately into your application. Other than white source bolt, you have a multiple other tools which you can go ahead and implement, okay. So in this module have a lab for the white source bolt, but there are other tool which is available into the DevOps which you can go ahead and implement into your application. So there is something called micro focus fortify, that you can go ahead and integrate with your DevOps pipeline during the build phase. You can get those tool during the build phase, and you can integrate into your CI/CD pipeline to check your vulnerability. Okay, you can provide your comprehensive test into your security. You have a Fortify static code analysis. You have a Fortify on demand. Okay, so this is going to check the what is the root cause of that, and it is going to automatically submit a static and dynamic scan request. Another product which you have something called check marks, so you can go ahead and do a integration with the check marks, okay. So it is going to look at the static versus dynamic application security testing you will be able to do, okay. You can look at the functional behavior and the response which is happening, okay. So those things you will be able to identify using a check marks, okay. Check marks, you can say here, it identify tracks, and also it helps you to fix the technical and logical security flaws. You have a tool called open source analyze with check marks. So open source analyzing tool and check marks static application security testing. So there is open source analyzing and the static code analysis also, which is available with the check marks, which can done incremental scan, which is going to do your dynamic scan, you can say open source security scan, that will be done. Another tool you have something called Vera code, okay, that you can go ahead and integrate with your DevOps, okay. This is going to help you, okay, to detect and also the fix the security issues, okay. So it is this also a code which you can go ahead and integrate, which is going to fix the security issue and detect into the Azure pipeline. This again you can get it free from your you can say the marketplace, and you can integrate, okay. So we talk about the different tools here, okay. uh, WhiteSource Bolt, Micro Focus Fortify, Checkmarks, Vera Code. So there are 4 tools which we talked about just now. Uh, ba- Basically, being a DevOps engineer or architect, you can say, if you are part of the DevOps team, you have to analyze these tools. Actually, your work will be analyzing these kind of tools which suits to your code, which is having a good which is best fits to your project, to find out the vulnerability. You need to analyze this kind of tool, and we have to go ahead and present to your client or present to your manager, saying that if I use this tool, will be able to reduce this kind of vulnerability, and what the percentage of the vulnerability, those things you will be able to identify. So you have to do you can say the comparison chart with between this, and then you are going to present that using this tool will be able to this kind of activity, and this is having a more feature in terms of that. Okay, so because whatever you say, Microsoft also gives you the multiple options here. Okay, Microsoft doesn't say that you can use this tool, you can use that tool, because the security is one of the you can say the very critical thing for your organization, and that has to be taken care. And the responsibility, Microsoft doesn't take anyone's responsibility, you can say that for the security when you're talking about the security. It's completely your responsibility to compare the features, compare the tool, and then utilize the tool which best suits to your project. Okay, but I can say that some which I have seen as part of market, the white source bolt for the open source security, it's good tool. And then you have something called a sonar q for the static code analysis, which is widely used into the market nowadays. Now if you're going to talk about where to implement, how to fit those tools into your application architecture or in the pipeline. Okay, so we are going to create something called pull request. Okay, so when the DevOps team, okay, so this is your DevOps team, this is your version control, this is your build agent, and here you are going to do a scanning. Okay, when you are going to create a pull request, okay, so when your developer does a code changes, they pushes those code to the version control. Once code is available into version control, because your CI pipeline is enabled, it is going to trigger my build agent. It is going to build the code, and inside the build code, or the build pipeline, you are going to do an incremental scan into your code. Okay, so once you are doing the scanning of your code, okay, it is going to detect a vulnerability. Okay, it is going to find a vulnerability, it is going to return back to the build agent, and you can go ahead and configure the build needs to be failed if I found a vulnerability during the scan, and it is going back to the developer, and you can raise issues or the bug with the developer, so the developer can go ahead and fix that code. Developer again does the changes and push back the changes to the version control, and these steps get repeated till those the issues are not fixed. So you have a scanning tool which is going doing a scanning once the build is get triggered. So you can go ahead and integrate this with using a build pipeline with your security scanning. Okay, and here you can see here there are a different scanning tool which is mentioned here again. So white source bolt, check marks, vera code, black duck, so these are the scanning tool which you can go ahead and integrate. Now, if you're going to implement a security, okay, the traditional approach which we have, basically we go and do it manual activity. We go and push those changes, and then we do something called discussion with your architect, and then we do the changes into your application. Okay. Now, if you're going to implement you can say security into your pipeline, you can go ahead and set those authentication authorization using a multi-factor authentication. Okay, so one of the multi-factor authentication you can go ahead and implement. You can use a CI/CD release pipeline. Okay, because what happens, whatever is getting generated, that's our artifact, and that's our having immutability property whenever the artifacts get generated. Okay, you can go and manage your permission using a rollback access control that is called RBAC. Okay, so you can go ahead and configure that what level of access the particular user is going to have. So that's what it is called as role based access control, the RBAC access. This user will have a read access, will this user have a contributor access or the admin access, what kind of access you are going to give him. You can go ahead and run different scanning tool. Okay, so it's mentioned here dynamic scanning. Okay, so as I told you, the dynamic scanning does a scanning of your application for your running application. A static analysis does a scanning for your source control when the code is sitting into your repository. Okay, so with the dynamic scanning tool, you can run a scanning for your running application, or you can use a penetration testing tool to do the testing for your running application. You can go ahead and monitor your services onto your server. Okay, to monitor your services to avoid a certain deletion. So if you're creating any services, let's suppose I'm creating a services like web app. Okay, so that's a web app which I'm creating into the Azure. Okay, I can go ahead and protect that log, protect the services, or protect those information. Okay, so how we can protect that application? So we can go ahead and implement something called a lock onto the Azure services. So that we'll be seeing it in the next step as well. Okay, so this you can see, you can look at this also. This is one of the again DevOps kit documentation. If I click here, this also talks about the different security. Okay, this URL also talks about the different security. So this is our DevOps kit, okay, which is going to help you how to secure your subscription, how to secure your Azure resources, how to secure your CI/CD pipeline, how to secure your different environment. Okay, so there are the different security while deploying, security in the CI/CD, security in the Azure. Okay, so there are the different security features which is already available. So you can refer to this GitHub URL, which is going to help you to implement a security. Okay, so that's what we are going to talk about here. If you look at that security into DevOps, so this is the security Azure DevOps kit, you can say, where you have all those security documentation which is available, and you can look at those documentation here. If I want to implement a CI/CD security, if I click here, I will be able to see the documentation complete graph here with the explanation how we can go ahead and apply those security into your DevOps. Okay, how to implement that, how we can get it implemented. So all those steps which is available as part of your security here. Okay, so this URL is one of the important which you talk about the security. There is a service called Azure Security Center, okay, which is a part of Azure portal.azure.com, which helps you to provide a security, to monitor security, to analyze a potential risk for your application. These things you will be able to do it using Azure Security Center. Okay, Azure Security Center helps in the two scenario. One scenario, it is going to detect the issues. Okay, it is going to assess the issue, what could be the issue. It is going to diagnose and stabilize and close the issues which is available into your Azure. Okay, so another thing which you can have a security policy defines. So one is there that you got find some issue, and then you are going to fix that issue. And another proactive activity, or you can say before the issue comes, you can have some policy defines. So you can define a security policy inside the Azure policies, and what it does, it is going to recommend that what is the security policy which, or the security standard which you can go ahead and follow into your organization. Okay, a security policy you can go ahead and define into your Azure services, and which is going to give you recommendation that how to approach, how to implement those services into your organization. We have Azure Policy. So Azure Policy also helps you in terms of implementing those kind of security. So you can go ahead and create, assign, and manage security into your subscription, into your resource group, into your particular resources which is available. Okay, and that is going to evaluate and scan. Then when you are going to create any kind of services, what are the security which you have to implement? Okay, let's suppose that I have to create a virtual machine. I can have a security that you are only, because I am working with US client, and the US client is only allowing to create resources into the East US location. Okay, you are not allowed to create your resources into any other location other than East US. So that kind of policy or the security requirement I can put into the Azure policy, which is going to help me that my resource or my whatever the application I'm going to create, that are the compliance required. Okay, even I can go ahead and integrate your Azure policy with the CI/CD pipeline, and we can look at the Azure pipeline policies, and we can implement those kind of policy into your organization. The policy structure looks like this. Okay, so what is the allowed location? So just now I talk about the allowing location, that if it's I'm deployed on the if I'm working with the US client and US client is having restriction to deploy application into the East US, I can create a policy that allowed location. This policy enables you to restrict a location for your organization, and this is a description which I'm going to put. Then we have a policy rules. If the location in the list of allowed list, this is a parameterized list. Okay, so the parameter value is in the allowed list, then I'm going to allow or create a resource, else I'm going to deny the resources. Okay, so we are going to create a policy, then we are going to assign a policy. So first step, someone asks you, or maybe in examination if you get a step how to create or assign a policy, the first step to create a policy. Okay, then assign a policy to the particular scope. So you have to define a scope. What is the scope of your policy? A scope could be your subscription level, means your complete organization level. You can have a scope onto your resource group level. Okay, you can have a policy implemented onto the particular resource level. So you have to identify which scope you are going to assign the policy, and then you can go ahead and view the policy result, like policy was successfully implemented or our policy is followed properly. So those you will be able to see the you can say evaluation result of your policy. And policy is defined into JSON format, and that can be assigned and created by the in the Azure portal into Azure CLI or using a PowerShell. Basically, this is going to help you to remediate your non-compliance kind of activity. So before the problem comes, we are going to give some recommendation to before coming to the issues. I'm going to give some recommendation. That's kind of thing you can say the policy helps you in terms of that. Okay, to reduce that kind of compliance issues. Okay. So these are the initiative. So an initiative to define a policy, okay, that is helping you in terms of a compliance. And you can see here the initiative example, how you can enable the Azure Security Center, and this is going to follow the policy, like you're going to monitor unencrypted SQL database policy. If anything has happened with the unencrypted data, or data is unencrypted, then we are going to monitor using our open source vulnerability policy. We are going to enable the endpoint, and then you are going to recommend according to that. Okay, to create a policy, you can see here assign to the particular scope, and then you are going to monitor that individual you can say the services which has been implemented over the time. There is an option called resource lock into the Azure. Okay, so there is an option which is available into the locking the resource. Okay, we have seen a thing into the our DevOps to lock our branch. Okay, so if we are going to lock our branch, means will not be able to modify or will not be able to do a commit operation into that particular branch, will not be able to change. Similar feature which is available into the Azure as well, to locking the resource or locking your Azure resources. There is a two option. Either you can have a cannot delete option. So there is a delete. If you're going to select this delete option, means user cannot delete the resources which is present, which is logged. Okay. Okay. But user can modify. If you have a delete operation, means user can modify but he can't delete, but still he can go and read and do a modify operation. If you have a read only lock, means user can only the read, do the read operation, he can't modify the resources or he can't delete. This is basically useful when you have your production or testing resources created. Okay, you don't want to allow a people to do a changes onto your production resources or production website configuration and whatever you have deployed into that particular resource group. You can go ahead and restrict using a resource group lock option, and which is going to help you not to modify or not to delete critical resources from the Azure. We have option called Azure Blueprint. Okay, Azure Blueprint is also helping you in terms of Azure DevOps scenario. Okay, you can have what kind of, we can associate your we can say the build pipeline, and you can track your something called what has been written in the blueprint. Blueprint is basically you can say a template. Okay, to define how the resource need to be developed. Okay, the blueprint in Azure, you can define that how the resource group manager template looks like, what all the component has to be there. So you are going to define, you can say the by a step process or a document which need to be followed when you're going to create any kind of resource. Okay, so what you are going to do, you can create a blueprint. Okay, you can go ahead and assign the blueprint, and then you can track those blueprint assignment, that if it is followed properly, it is used properly, so that traceability, auditability, all the things you'll be able to do using a Azure blueprint. Another option which you have, Azure Advanced Threat Protection. Okay, uh, this is again going to understand, or you can say the going to analyze the thread of your application. Okay, what it does, goes and define checks the things. Okay, so it is going to find out that what kind of thread or what kind of security risk could be part of your Azure. Okay, let's suppose that I am a user which is part of my some of organization. Currently I'm trying to log in from the India location, and if I create or I log into the different server which has been deployed to the different location, I'll try to log in my same account from that particular server. What my AD will identify, or as Azure Active Directory will identify, like that is there, it looks like a user is moved from the India location to the different location, and that could be a potential risk, because immediately it's not possible a person can move from one location to another location. So its possibility is there that some other person who is trying to hack your user ID or trying to hack your identity from the different location. So they will ask me either give me your some other you can say a multi-factor authentication ID, or it will ask me some other kind of identity or OTP from me, so that I will be able to uh, authenticate myself in order to log in into the application. Okay, so that I have to do. So this is what you will be able to achieve using the thread protection, and you'll be able to identify those kind of issues, and this is going to give you a recommendation like how you can sense the issues, how you can monitor those issues, how you can implement that kind of implementation for your organization. Okay, so these are the few security tricks we have. We talk about the different tricks from the Azure DevOps perspective, as well as from the DevOps, how to implement security into DevOps, how to implement security into the Azure portal as well. In this module, we have a lab which talks about the securing your compliance requirement into Azure DevOps. So in this, we are going to use a WhiteSource Bolt, which is going to scan a security into your DevOps, okay, which is going to check what all the uh, open source licenses or open source code has been used into your application, and that is going to find out the vulnerability for your open source, and it is going to give me a report which is a compliance report. You will be getting it, and you can go ahead and mitigate those risks, and you can fix those issues into your application.